I'm Bryan Caplan, professor of economics at George Mason University and the author of the all-new Build Baby Build, The Science and Ethics of Housing Regulation. Here's my really quick version. This is the most fascinating book you will ever read about housing regulation. All right, now, you may think that that is not a very high bar, but what I do in the book is take together a lot of research that finds very large gains of allowing developers to build more stuff. I combine it with a comic book format. So I try to actually use words and pictures in combination to make the research come alive. And then I just walk you through all of the great stuff that we can expect if we were to deregulate housing. First of all, let's back up. What are the main regulations that are currently strangling the construction market? First of all, it's really hard to get permission to build tall buildings. Empire State Building was built in like 1 year. Try doing that today. It's almost impossible, not because we don't have the technology, but because you don't have governments that will allow you to go and move ahead and actually build it. There'll be many levels of delay and waiting if you get permission at all. All right. Secondly, very standard to go and make it especially hard to build multifamily buildings. All right, so this is a second one. Apartments, townhomes, duplexes, all of this is subject to a lot of extra regulation. Roughly speaking, about 80% of all residential areas in the U.S. are zoned exclusively for single-family homes. It means no apartments, no townhomes, not allowed. Third big regulation, minimum lot size. Regulations saying that you have to have a lot of land for every house. Very common now to say you have to have a full acre per house, which means builders are required by law to waste most of their land. If they were allowed, they would probably build, and almost in the real world, they almost always do build as many houses as the law allows, because people don't actually really appreciate extra land all that much compared to getting a cheaper house price. All right, so if we were to go and turn the dial of these regulations, which are now very strict, down to a much lower level, what could we expect to get? In the book, I go over estimates of how much does all of this regulation increase the price of houses. Rough answer is that it's about roughly doubles the cost of homes. In other words, if we would deregulate, we get the price in the long run down by about 50%. That is a huge gain because shelter is such a large share of your budget that if you can get the cost of it down by 50%, you get your whole cost of living down by a lot. Roughly speaking, we're talking about a 10% overall fall in your cost of living, which means this one seemingly boring set of regulation is preventing you from getting an 11% gain in your standard of living. The really cool part of the book is where I go over all of the extra benefits of deregulation. Yes, we can go and get housing cheaper. We can get living standards higher. But what's really cool is that there's a lot of other problems that seem unrelated to housing that are very closely related to housing. For example, housing deregulation reduces inequality, and by a lot. Why? Because poor people spend a larger share of their budget on housing, so when you get the price down, they get a larger percentage gain. Furthermore, owners are richer than tenants. That means that when you deregulate housing, for owners, there is a mixed benefit. On the one hand, they can get more housing cheaper, but they also lose the value of some of what they got. Tenants, it is a pure gain. Put this all together, and housing deregulation reduces inequality. Housing deregulation raises social mobility because it makes it cheaper for people to move to a high-wage area. Historically, it was really easy for people in places like Mississippi to get a big raise in their standard of living just by getting in their car and moving to a higher wage part of the country. It doesn't work very well anymore because now, in contrast to the past, high-wage areas have high cost of living, especially high housing cost. And in general now, if you are a low-wage worker, the extra cost of housing is more than 100% of your wage gain, so you're better off not moving. Deregulation will give us more mobility. Deregulation will give us higher fertility. Right now, a lot of people keep living in their parents' basements because they can't afford their own home, which means they're really unlikely to get married and even less likely to have kids. If you make housing cheaper, we can get fertility up, and this has become a very serious problem in the United States and many other countries. Housing deregulation is good for the environment because new homes are better insulated, even though they're larger, lower emissions. Furthermore, perversely, we got the highest regulation in places like California that have the nicest climates, which means that people are repelled to areas with worse climate and higher cooling and heating costs. All right. A bunch of other benefits that I talk about in the book. Some that are kind of surprising are likely that deregulation will reduce crime, because in urban areas, a lot of the land is actually vacant, largely due to regulation. And what happens is that vacant lots become breeding grounds for crime. There's a cool experiment I talk about in the book about this very point. Deregulate and we can get crime down as well. Now, why do we have these regulations that are so terrible? Well, I say, look, the main reason is people think the world would be worse without the regulations. The other thing that I say is actually they are mistaken. Even though regulation does go and reduce some problems, these problems are nowhere close to the gains, so we're better off just going whole hog and deregulating. And if you are worried about the problems caused, most obviously parking and traffic, the sensible solution is to stop making parking and driving free during peak times. It's much better to go and charge people to park and drive than it is to make housing cost millions of dollars for a home. So anyway, that is the book. It is Build Baby Build, The Science and Ethics of Housing Regulation. And this book is releasing on May 1st. So by the time you're watching it, you should be able to get it everywhere that fine books are sold. Thank you very much.